Yes. Yes, same one. I think the thing that really stuck out to me in there, was the idea that like the work of Jesus was to fulfill the law in order to bring us back to the place that Israel started, which was outside the promised land. Which I kind of, as they're going through that, I'm thinking like, so. Remember how we've been equating the promised land to the Garden of Eden? So Israel being outside of the promised land here in Deuteronomy is kind of the same situation as Cain and Abel, and that place where they're dwelling being outside of the Garden of Eden, and sort of being faced with this dilemma of what's going to happen now that we're not living where we were supposed to be living, and now that sin enters the world. And I really kind of love the imagery of thinking about the church as being in that place of Cain and Abel, where we are not in the place that God has promised for us to be in right now. We see it, but not in its fullness, in its completeness, right? We're dwelling with the Spirit, but we're not dwelling in the new heaven and new earth. And we kind of have to figure out, like Cain and Abel, how do we live in this fallen world where sin has entered the world, and am I my brother's keeper? Kind of in that same sense of Cain and Abel. So that's just something I like to think about in terms of how do we as New Testament Christians, what do we do with the Old Testament? And so that's one thing that I like to do with it. Cool. Anyone else have thoughts on that? Anything you want to talk about?
I think understanding the Old Testament makes the New Testament make a lot more sense.
Right.
All the things that are said.
Yeah.
Now rereading the New Testament after reading the Torah, it's like, okay, now what Jesus says makes so much more sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And not just Jesus, but Paul.
Yeah.
Because Paul was like, he was a Pharisee. He was like, he had to recite the Torah when he was 13. So he knew this better than you or I.
Yeah.
And he's the one who's writing all these Pauline epistles, and everything kind of coming out of the law. Galatians is all about the believer's relationship to the law. Romans is not all about, but heavily about the believer's relationship to the law. And like, he calls it the fundamental, elemental principles of the world. He's like, you already understand this. Paul viewed this as milk. But for most of the church today, they haven't gone and gotten the milk. And so you get into the meat of Paul's letters, and it's like, well, of course it doesn't make sense. Of course we don't know what he's talking about in 1 Corinthians 11 with head coverings. Because of the angels, no one knows that angels were on the covering, So, yeah, it's definitely one of those things where you can't read the New Testament without the Old. But you also are going to read the Old Testament better with the New.
So why do so many churches dismiss the Old Testament?
I think it's just the lack of understanding.
They're afraid of legalism or
Afraid of
works
legalism.
righteousness, too.
Exactly. And you can either, so there's this spectrum, right? You have on the one end, you have legalism, which is like, oh, well, now that I know the law, I have to keep the law. And of course, it's a temptation when we study the law, and we see God's perfection and righteousness, and we see all the ways that we fall short. Like, legalism is obviously a temptation. On the other end of that spectrum is what's called antinomianism. So nomos is the Greek word for law. So anti-nomos would be just like anti-law, right? I can do whatever I want. I'm just free in Jesus. I can live however I want. And at the end of the day, I expect salvation. And so you have these two ends of the spectrum where I'm either earning my salvation or I'm living however I want. And like the reality is that the Christian life is going to take place in the middle of those two things. And you have a balance in that spectrum. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 13. It's where we left off last week. Oh man, it's a fun one. This is going to be a fun week. I enjoyed putting this together this week. We have 7 chapters to roll through. It's not going to be too much to cover tonight, but there's a lot going on here. In chapter 13, and a lot of the chapters tonight are kind of broken down into three parts, three sort of paragraphs where things get repeated or they're moving from topic to topic throughout the chapter. And so in this first chapter, in chapter 13, it starts off and says, if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other Elohim, which you have not known, and let us serve them, and you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer of dreams, for Yahweh, your Elohim, is testing you, to know whether you love Yahweh, your Elohim, with all your heart and with all your soul, and you shall walk after him. So what do you do to the prophet in verse 5? He shall be put to death, because he has taught rebellion against Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Okay. Go ahead.
Just in verse 3, he says, don't shema them.
Oh, that's
Because
fun.
he's trying to test if you will love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and strength.
That's so good. That's so good. So listen, in verse 3, the word listen is shema. And he says, I'm testing you to know whether you'll love me with all your heart and with all your soul. It's that language going back to the Shema. So good. Thank you for pointing that out. I ran into that while I was studying, and I didn't even really look twice at it. Okay, so verse 6. So keep in mind what just happened in verses 1 through 5. If the prophet says, let's go after other gods, kill him. Even if everything else he prophesied came true, because he's telling you to go after other gods. So verse 6. If your brother or the son of your mother or the son of your daughter or the wife you embrace or your friend who is as your own soul entices you, saying, let us go and serve other Elohim, which neither you nor your fathers have known, some of the Elohim of the peoples who are around you, whether near or whether far, from the one end of the earth to the other, what do you do to them? You kill them. Yeah. You shall not spare him, you shall not conceal him. Your hand shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. You shall stone him to death with stones, because he sought to draw you away from Yahweh, your Elohim. In verse 12, if you hear in one of your cities, which Yahweh, your Elohim, is giving you to dwell there, that certain worthless fellows have gone out among you and have drawn away the inhabitants of the city, saying, let us go and serve other Elohim, which you have not known. Then you shall inquire and make search and ask diligently, which I think is a really good point, because what he's about to say is you're going to kill everyone with the sword and burn the city down. You don't want to do that without having all the evidence, right? So you're going to inquire and search and ask diligently, make sure that whole city has turned its back on Yahweh and is worshiping other gods. And if they have, then you're going to take that whole city down, and the whole city becomes a burnt offering to Yahweh. So in chapter 13, this is kind of expanding on the first of the Ten Commandments. You're not going to have any God, you're not going to have any Elohim before Yahweh. And it doesn't matter whether it is whether it's a prophet, whether it's a family member, even your spouse, or whether it is an entire city in your land turning its back on Yahweh, the punishment is death. And if you don't do that, they're going to turn you away from Yahweh. And that's kind of, it's going to become a theme in these 7 chapters tonight. Go ahead.
So, I know that we studied the Ten Commandments a long time ago, like in the beginning. So, this seems like a dumb question, but isn't one of the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill?
Yeah.
It is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It still is.
The
Like,
6th one, yeah.
and it means kill. Like, we didn't learn that it meant something elaborate or different than what, like, the world takes it as, or what. Okay.
It does, yes.
So don't you think it's kind of crazy that he's commanding the Israelites to uphold that first commandment, which is also not upholding the third commandment? Is it the third? The second commandment?
For killing?
Yeah, 6. Oh,
The
way
6th
out.
one, yeah. It's
Yeah.
killing. I remember 6 is killed because it kind of looks like a little bomb.
Oh, good
8
idea.
is don't steal because it's split, turning on its side and it's So, okay, great question. The killing that I think that's being talked about in the first commandment is going to be like, yeah, thank you. The sixth commandment. Is going to be like the murdering. Like we're going to talk about cities of refuge tonight. And there's when someone murders intentionally with malice in their heart, that's the killing that's being talked about there, I think. It's not
Taking a life.
taking a life, and it's not killing in warfare. That seems to be separate from what's being talked about there, because that's also explicitly allowed in the conquest of the Promised Land. So it seems that there is a rightful place within the way that the law is upheld punitively for death as a consequence.
It's not the regular kill word either.
That's not
It's-
that way. If it was
It's not like a different form of mot. It's this other word, rasach. To murder, slay, premeditated or accidental, or as vengeance, murder, assassinate, etc. Mostly.
There you go.
Yeah, okay,
Cool.
yeah, thanks.
Was there a hand over here too? I thought I saw someone over here with, in this row with his hand up. Okay. All right, I'm gonna move on then. So yeah, if anyone tries to turn you away from Yahweh, kill them so that they stop.
Is it specifically people that claim to be of Israel? And then are pulling you away, like, let's go worship other gods? Or is it anybody that doesn't believe in Yahweh, then?
So if Israel follows the commands of the conquest, who else would be there to pull them away? Right?
Because they should have already killed everybody.
Because there's, yeah, everyone else should be dead.
There's
Now,
there's still sojourners among
yes, but the sojourners, okay, so you really don't get this idea until like halfway through Joshua when Rahab joins Israel, but what happens is that when Rahab joins, she spends 7 days outside of the camp. Presumably, this isn't explicit, but I think going through the washing on the 3rd and 7th day of the purification to, in essence, become an Israelite without becoming, like to be part of the camp, but without being totally an Israelite who would participate fully in all of the tabernacle stuff.
Because it does say pure someone in one of your cities, so
Mhm.
that makes sense. If they've already come into the city,
Mhm.
they've already kind of.
Yeah. I guess my point is that as Israel progresses through history, some Gentiles become part of Israel. That statement had more power behind it than most. Yeah. Anything else on chapter 13? I think in my mind it kind of is really simple. Like if someone tries to turn you away from worshiping Yahweh and says, let's worship other gods, you kill them. Historically speaking, throughout the history books of Israel, does that happen? No. Of course not.
They don't pay any attention.
Nope. Yeah. And if you don't keep the law, when you don't do that, what's the result? Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28.
If you don't follow the law, you die.
You die, you get cursed. So if we just follow that logic, if you don't kill the person who's telling you to not worship Yahweh, Yahweh will kill you. Great. Okay. Cool. All right. Chapter 14 starts by going over a list of clean and unclean food and animals, again, just like we came across in Leviticus. And the reason for these clean and unclean animals, we talk a lot about hygiene and like what animals were able to be cleaned in a way that would be healthy for Israel to eat. And I'm not going to be like, I don't think that's wrong. I think there's merit to that. But if we just look at these verses right here, and specifically verse 2, what is the purpose of eating some things and not eating other things? It's that you are a people who is holy to Yahweh. What does holy mean? Kadosh, set apart, singled out. If you look on the right side, I love this definition, singled out. Israel is singled out for Yahweh among all the nations. So, this is a tough question. Is it sinful to eat an unclean animal?
It's an unclean animal.
Okay, so Peter's dream. So for us today, there are no unclean animals, right? Don't call unclean what I have made clean, is what it says there in Peter's vision of the sheep coming down with all the animals on it. How about for a Canaanite? Someone who wasn't in Israel, could they eat a rock badger?
Well, I don't know what their laws are.
They're
I
probably
mean,
not very
evidently,
tasty.
they had laws that they grow over and over again, and that's why God is wiping them out.
Sure.
So, I don't know if God told them not to eat rock badgers, and they did anyway, and that's why we're wiping them out. I don't know.
So it seems to me that, and we're going to talk a little bit about this at the end, when we just hit on, is a really great point, and he's going to bring it up at the end of the chapter. The reason for the clean and unclean animals is because of Israel's uniqueness. So it doesn't seem to me that this is part of the thing that the other nations were doing that's getting them kicked out of the land. And I'm just going to fast forward down here to verse 21. It says, "You shall not eat anything that died naturally. You may give it to the sojourner who is within your towns, that he may eat it, or sell it to a foreigner. But you are a people that is kadosh to Yahweh, your Elohim." So, this is kind of one of those challenging things, because I've talked a number of times about how the law applies to Jews and Gentiles. This sort of seems to be a bit of an exception to that statement.
Do you think, like it's so kind of a paradox, but the law does apply to the Gentiles and the Israelites. However, the Gentiles didn't receive it.
That we have any record of, yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So because they didn't receive it, doesn't that mean they weren't beholden to it?
I think that that's kind of what Paul's addressing in Romans 2 when he talks about Gentiles who keep the law without having the law.
Yes, but let's look specifically like at this time, at this point.
Mhm.
Like, I just think that he's waiting for them to be right, for them to choose, because that was what the law was for the nation.
Mhm.
So there's like this door that swings for them to come in, yet they haven't approached. Like, I know how, when Paul was talking about the Gentiles were not, they didn't need the law to be able to be a part of it.
Right.
I totally get that. But here at this, because the seed has not yet come,
Sure.
it's already, I feel like it wasn't that they were allowed to eat what do you call it, a rock badger?
Yeah.
It's not like they were allowed to, like it was almost like it was a passive will.
Mhm.
I don't
Okay,
know.
you brought up a number of points that I want to respond to all of them at once.
Okay.
I think I guess what I want to say on that is there's what's called a general revelation and there's what's called a special revelation. A general revelation, like for example, Psalm 19 is a perfect example. And it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There are no speech, there are no words, whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the earth, in which, in them he has set a tent for the sun." And so all of this language in verses 1 through 6 is telling us all of the ways that God is simply revealed by virtue of the fact that we live on a planet. This didn't come from nothing. Then, verse 7, and this is why I love Psalm 19, because it gives us both. And he says, "The Torah of Yahweh is perfect." And so he goes from, this is what everybody sees, and then this is what has been revealed specifically by God through the law. And so you have a accountability, I think is what we would conclude by reading Romans, where everybody is accountable to what God has revealed to them. And God has revealed himself to everybody in some way, even if by nothing more than general revelation. But to Israel, he gave the special revelation, which was the Torah. And through the Torah, he was also reaching out to other nations. So then the question that arises from that is then what is the other nation's accountability to the Torah? And I have to wonder, and just to bring it back to the chapter that we're talking about, they didn't know what animals they could eat or not eat. They were given a law, so doesn't it make perfect sense then that Israel could sell animals that they couldn't eat to other nations without those other nations being held accountable for sin for consuming an animal that they didn't know was sin?
Well, then you gotta throw in Genesis 9:3 where it says, everything that lives shall, everything moving that lives shall be food for you. So if Noah wanted to eat a rock badger.
You can eat a rock badger.
But he was specifically told, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, not specifically told he was a rock badger.
Yeah. But he could eat anything that moves.
Wait,
Yeah.
who was that show to? That was
To
said
Noah. Genesis 9:3 is what she was reading.
I thought she said Genesis 2, and I was like, that's not Noah. But Genesis
That would
9.
be correct.
Yeah. So that's very interesting.
Mhm.
So why did it change?
Ooh, yeah, why did it change? Why does the relationship, why do the terms of the relationship between God and man change over time?
Oh, we can.
I think that when God decided to build this nation and he wanted this nation to be set apart, he gave them certain rules and things that they had to follow that would make them different from everybody else.
Yes.
And even though it doesn't make any logical sense, it just makes them different, like the way they dress or something.
Does eating a rock badger or not eating a rock badger make me any more or less good in God's eyes? It's not an issue of morality in any way, but it is a matter of Israel being set apart.
Like, I don't know about the rest of you, but like that just blew my mind right now. That the Torah is for other people to see them different.
Deuteronomy 4:6.
Even through all these weeks that we've been coming here, I'm still like, well, the law, but what about the law? Why is the law? And are we in agreement here? Or is this what you're saying, that the Torah was not for that in him to keep these strict, well, except for the purification and to approach them, but for people to be like, well, that's weird, they can't eat this. And what makes them so different? And let's come check them out, or whatever.
So check this out.
That's insane.
Keep them, he's talking about the law. This is Deuteronomy 4:6. He says, keep them and do them, meaning the commandments. For that, your obedience, will be your wisdom and understanding in the sight of the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. So the other nations are going to look at Israel and be like, that's weird. Tell us about why you're doing this and where you're getting this wisdom and understanding. And through Israel's obedience to the law, this is how it was supposed to be. The other nations would see that Yahweh was so much better than their gods.
What verse was that again?
Deuteronomy 4:6.
4:6.
I always remember it because it's 6:4, but just 4:6. 6:4 is the Shema, and 4:6 is also
So
really
we
important.
read this to the beginning, and I didn't even get this.
Yeah, that's
Did everybody
okay.
else get that? Does everybody else know this?
I'd like a
No,
Bible
seriously, I want to know.
Bible school.
Never stop
Bible's
reading
cool.
it. Read it again next week and get something different.
I know. Go ahead.
Okay, so clean and unclean things, verse 21. Okay, so let's go down to verse 22. We're going to keep pushing. You shall tithe. What does tithe mean? Give a tenth. All the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year, and before Yahweh your God in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there. Remember Deuteronomy 12, the centrality of worship. He's going to put his name in a place. It was Shiloh for a while, and it was Jerusalem. To make his name dwell there, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and your flock, that you may learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim always. Who is the tithe for? The person who gives it. Is that weird to you?
Yeah, I can understand that. Anybody question mark here, that doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense? What do you mean it doesn't make
So,
sense?
the tithe goes to the church, and that would be the Levites who get that tithe, and the Levites would eat it. But this sounds like you you eat it yourself.
Yes.
Because the church is for you, so, right? We give to the church, but the church is for us, so what we give, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
If
And
you
the
ever want to
Levites.
get your tithe back, just invite me to lunch and the church will pay. Just throwing that out there. Okay, so the tithe in this context is for the person who brought the tithe to go to where God is and eat it in the presence of God. Isn't that cool?
Is there more than one tithe?
Yes, we're going to get to that in the next paragraph. The tithe in this paragraph is for the person who gives the tithe to go to the place where God is and consume it, eat it in the presence of God and in fellowship with God.
Like communion.
Communion. So the purpose of tithe is so that you go and share a meal with God. That's awesome. Okay, next paragraph. We're just going to jump down through. Oh, wait, I don't want to jump down through this. I want to read verse 26.
Verse
'cause I love it.
26, because-
26 is so good. Okay, so let me start in 24. If the way is too long for you, you're not able to carry the tithe. Maybe you just had a really good harvest and there's too much wheat to carry, or maybe you have a big flock and you would have to lead a whole bunch of cows. You don't want to take your tithe all the way there. Just sell it and carry the money with you. It says in verse 25, turn it into money and bind it up into money in your hand and go to the place that Yahweh, your Elohim, chooses and spend the money on whatever you desire. Oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink, whatever your appetite craves.
Yeah.
I looked up that word for
And
strong drink. According to Jusinius, quoting Herodotus, it could be beer, it could be mead.
oh yeah, man,
And
you worship
coming
God,
out
you
of-
better pregame.
Coming out of Egypt, beer was a major part of it. It was basically currency
Yeah.
where they just came out of.
I mean, in Exodus, it talks about the barley harvest. Do you think they were making beer?
Well, archaeologically, beer, like seriously, beer was a major part of their commerce in Babylon too.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to encourage anyone to act without wisdom here. I mean, alcohol is a very contentious topic in the church. If it's ever been a struggle for you, act in wisdom, right? It is part of worshiping God for ancient Israel.
Did that change, like, did that change with, like after the
Jesus turned water into wine.
No,
He partnered with
No,
prostitutes.
I know, not the drinking part, the tithing part.
Oh, the tithing part.
Like, how did that change, and should it have changed, and you don't have enough time for speculation?
I'm going to talk about it in the next chapter.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about it when we get into chapter 15, verse 10. Yeah, good question. Okay, so I want to jump down now to verse 28. Here's another tithe. At the end of every 3 years, you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in the same year and lay it up within your towns. Okay, so this is like the idea of storehouses. And the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, in other words, like, what's he going to do for food? He's got to work in the tabernacle all day long. He can't go out and farm. And the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, those are your underprivileged, your outcast from the community, the people who can't work, who are within your town, shall come and eat and be filled, that Yahweh your Elohim may bless you in all the work of your hands that you do. So that sounds more like what you would think the tithe is for, right? It's about social justice. And that is a major part of the tithe in Israel. People debate whether this is a separate tithe or whether it's just every 3 years you're not eating the tithe, or whether this is an additional tithe, so every 3 years you're actually bringing 20%, 10% is for you, and 10% goes to the storehouse. It's not that explicit that I can really come to a conclusion on that, but I think it's really cool to see that the purpose of the tithe in Israel is to provide for the people who can't provide for themselves, but it's also a way for you to go in fellowship with God. And if you take those two concepts and apply it to modern day, isn't that the same thing that we're accomplishing when we put tithe in the online giving or in the check in the tithe box or whatever it is? We're providing for people who can't provide for themselves, and it's a way of communing and fellowshipping with God because of what we're going to talk about in the next chapter. Pretty neat. All right, so chapter 15 in the sabbatical year. We talked about this before. We don't need to go super into it, but it's every 7 years, whoever has a debt, that debt is just forgiven. And it says, don't harden your heart and not give a loan just because the 7th year is coming. Maybe the 7th year starts tomorrow. If someone comes to you for a loan, don't harden your heart and not give it to them because you know it won't be repaid. You should still give the loan and And then when it's forgiven, God's just going to bless you. So it talks all about that in those verses there. Let me go here to verse 10. You shall freely give to him, and your heart shall not be begrudging when you give to him, because for this Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in all your work that you undertake. So, we talked about tithe, now we're talking about giving to someone who's poor and who comes to you for money. So, this, Petra, is the verse that you were talking about, 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7. And it says, this is obviously Paul writing to the Corinthian church, talking about the cheerful giver. And he says, each one must give as he has decided in his heart. And what this is doing is it is saying that all of these laws, just like every other law, has been fulfilled in Jesus. I, as a follower of Jesus, have zero responsibility to give anything from the money that I have in order to earn anything from God, to get any blessing from God. My salvation is not dependent upon putting money in the tithe box. If I thought it was, that'd be legalism. Of course, antinomianism would say that you shouldn't just give nothing because you know that. I'm getting there's that balance. So what should I do as a person who follows God? I should give what I've decided in my heart to give, understanding that giving is an act of worship, to be in fellowship with God, and to provide for people who can't provide for themselves. It's the same two things, and those things, hopefully, would drive me to give more and not less. What do you think about that? Okay. Back to Deuteronomy then. 15, that's where we are. Okay, so the next verse, verse 11. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hands to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land. Does that ring a bell for you? There will never cease to be poor in the land? Yes. Jesus said it. So, Matthew 26:11. I'm jumping out of Moses a little bit tonight, just because I like to show when we hit these places that are so obviously quoted in the New Testament, especially in red letters, how the Torah is being used and applied in the New Testament. I think it's very cool. So, what's going on here? Jesus is being anointed at Bethany. Okay? Why this waste? For this could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor. And another gospel, I think it's Mark, says that it was Judas who said that, because he had the charge of the money. Right. But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. So what is Jesus doing by quoting Deuteronomy 15 when after he's been anointed in preparation for his burial? He's saying, look, the poor, the thing that you are presuming to be concerned about, that's always going to be there. I'm here right now at this special moment in history, at this special time, and this woman understands something about that you don't. And it seems to be like she gets the fact that I am the culmination of the law and the prophets, and you're worried about the law when the law is sitting in front of you. Thanks, Patrick. I knew it was going to be a little bit of a light night tonight because a few people told me they weren't going to come, and I was like, as long as Petra's here, we'll still have a conversation. Okay, 12, verse 12. If a Hebrew man or Hebrew woman is sold to you, they serve 6 years, they go free in the 7th year. This is all about providing for the poor. The reason why a Hebrew person would be sold to you is that they maybe have a debt that they can't pay, something like that, and it's all about treating them well. You shall furnish him liberally when he goes out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, out of your wine press, and you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and that Yahweh your God redeemed you. Therefore, I command you this day. And if he doesn't want to go out from you because you're so good, then you can put it all through his ear. And I think you've all probably heard the teaching of the bond servant. Someone, if you're just such a good master that the slave doesn't want to leave, you can put the thing through the ear into the doorpost. maybe there's some relationship to that, if we connect it to like Passover with the blood on the doorpost. I'm not really sure how to like construct a full teaching out of that, but it's interesting to see some parallelism there in the doorpost, the blood on the doorpost, the blood on the ear. Obviously the priests, when they're anointed, they get the blood on the ear. So I do kind of wonder what connections are there. And I'm sure there's people out there who put something together on it, but I really haven't put that much on it. It's interesting though. And then 19. All the firstborn males that you dedicate to Yahweh your God, you don't do any work with the firstborn of your herd or the firstborn of your flock. You shall eat it. I love it. You and your household before Yahweh your God, year by year, at the place that Yahweh will choose. There's Deuteronomy 12 again. But if it has any blemish, if it is lame or blind or has any serious blemish, whatever, you shall not sacrifice it to Yahweh your God. You just eat it within your towns. The unclean and the clean alike may eat it, as though it were a gazelle or a deer. Only you shall not eat its blood. You shall pour it out on the ground like water. And that makes total sense because the whole time we haven't been able to eat blood, right? So even the firstborn of your flock, it's not something that's supposed to be a burnt offering, where you take it to the tabernacle and the whole thing is burned up and it doesn't provide any food for you. It's just totally an act of worship to God. It's a thing that you are supposed to, yes, worship God with, as God provides for you back by giving you the food of the firstborn animal in your flocks. I think that God's provision is something that's totally missed very commonly as we study the law. It's just right there, right on the front. God is continually providing for people. I think that's pretty cool. Okay, feasts. I'm just going to keep moving until someone interrupts me. So, in the month of Abib, keep the Passover to Yahweh your God. For the month of Abib, Yahweh your Elohim brought you out of Egypt by night, and you shall offer the Passover sacrifice to Yahweh your Elohim from the flock or the herd at the place that Yahweh will choose to make his name dwell there. Again, Deuteronomy 12. It just keeps coming up. You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat it with unleavened bread, the bread of affliction. This reminds me, so until Easter, Protestants don't really practice this very commonly. Many people do, but most Catholics practice Lent. So currently, right now, we're in a time where people have given up something and aren't going to consume it, whatever it is that they've given up, are not going to consume it again until after Easter. And it's kind of this time of intentionally not having something that's good. There's nothing wrong with eating bread with leaven in it, right? But it's called here the bread of affliction, because I think it's a reminder that you're giving up something that tastes good. It's yummy. It's better than eating bread without leaven, but you're not going to eat it for 7 days so that you are afflicting yourself. And that affliction acts as a reminder of the fact that you came out of, you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, and to remember the day when you came out of the land of Egypt. So no leaven shall be seen in your territory for 7 days, nor shall any flesh that you sacrifice on the evening of the first day remain all night until morning. You shall not offer the Passover sacrifice within any of your towns that Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, but only at the place that he will choose to make his name dwell in it. There you shall offer the Passover sacrifice. So Passover can't just be done anywhere. It has to be done in, well, at first Shiloh and then later Jerusalem. Make sense?
Question about what,
Yeah.
why, this is 7 days if you don't eat unleavened bread. Why do Catholics eat 40 days?
It's a totally different tradition. I was relating the concept of giving something up for remembrance, but Lent has nothing to do with it. Not nothing. What is Aubergine better? What's
The 40 days, I mean, at least what I was taught was that the 40 days reflected Jesus' fasting.
that makes sense?
That's what they told me.
I'll take it.
Yeah, that's what my Catholic family does too.
Nice. But it ends on Easter, so I would think it would have something to do with like Easter, resurrection, Passover.
Well, it
somehow.
does, they combine, it's so weird, but it started with 40 days of fasting, so it's 40 days of Lent, but then they tacked on the Good Friday and then the resurrection, and even though that's not quite how it happened.
Gotcha. It reminds me of Eve, even though it's totally different. Eid is, like, is it Islamic?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a big Islam population, big Muslim population in Kampala. And we went to an Indian restaurant one time, and it happened to be the last day of Eid, and we didn't know it when we walked in. And it was like a party, and we were put in like a gazebo where you sit cross-legged on the floor, and they brought us a whole roasted goat. It was wild. Well, they wanted to. We ordered other food, but they were like, "We'll bring you the goat." And we were like, "I don't think we can eat a whole goat." But it was pretty cool to get to like be in a place that's like has a big Muslim population during like their food celebrations was a cool way to sort of participate in another culture. Okay, so next is the Feast of Weeks. What's another name for the Feast of Weeks? Nope. Close. That's a different word. Feast of Weeks. You remember how many weeks there are? You count 7 weeks plus a day. 7 times 7 is 49. And plus 12 makes 50. It's Pentecost. Feast of Weeks is Pentecost. So you count, begin to count the 7 weeks from the time the sickle is first put into the standing grain. That meant something to them. It doesn't mean much to me. Then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks of to Yahweh your Elohim with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give as Yahweh your Elohim blesses you. And you shall rejoice, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow who are with you at, again, the place where Yahweh puts his name. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and be careful to observe these statutes. So these first 2 feasts, the Passover, you're remembering Egypt. The Feast of Weeks, you're remembering that you were a slave in Egypt. And then we come down to the third one, the Feast of Booths. And you keep the Feast of Booths for 7 days when you gather the produce from the threshing floor and the winepress. You shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow within your towns. And for 7 days you keep the feast of Yahweh, to Yahweh your Elohim, at the place where he puts his name, once again, 3 times a year. All your males shall appear before Yahweh at the place that he will choose, and celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths. And unleavened bread and Passover coincide. That's why above we call it Passover, down here we call it unleavened bread. How many feasts were there in Leviticus 23? Say that louder. With confidence. There were 7. How many are there here? 3. Why did we get rid of 4? Maybe a better question. What pattern are the feasts adhering to that we have seen all over the place? The pattern of 3 and 7, right? We've seen 3 and 7 everywhere. We've seen 3 and 7 in creation. We've seen 3 and 7 in Numbers 19. There were 7 feasts in Leviticus 23. Now there's only 3 in Deuteronomy 16. Why the reduction for the second generation? I don't think it's because God doesn't care about those other feasts. I don't think it's because he doesn't want those feasts to be celebrated by his people. I think that it's following the same pattern. It's all over the place. What does that pattern tell us? In Numbers 19, what was that pattern accomplishing? Remember? Numbers 19, you take the red heifer, you take the cedar with the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, you burn it all, you take the ashes, you mix it with living water, and then you wash an unclean person on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And what did the washing accomplish? Purification. So if I want to look literarily, instead of literally, at Genesis 1, and I see it not explicitly as the creation of the world, although I think we can see both, but I see it as the creation of the nation of Israel, with the separating of the waters, the dry land emerging, just like the Red Sea, with the separation of the light from dark, just like it was in the land of Goshen when they were in Egypt. And then I see that creation account as a story written from Yahweh, mediated by Moses to the nation of Israel, who are at Mount Sinai, who are freaking out. And this creation account is the story of God making them a new nation and taking them out of the chaotic waters, the tohu vabohu of Egypt, and bringing them into their own place in a peaceful land. Isn't that in line with purification of Numbers 19? What are the feasts for? Judges take all that I just summarized, and it's all about purification, and the feasts are following the same pattern of 3 and 7. The feasts are for remembering backwards, but what are they accomplishing? Purification. So when you're celebrating the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths, and all of the males and all of Israel have to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year, the purpose behind all of this is for purification. Purification in Numbers 19 had to be done when you had contact with a dead body, you had contact with some kind of bodily fluid, you had contact with unclean animals. Those are the 3 things that made you impure or unclean, and you had to go outside the camp and be washed on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Why would Israel need to be continually purified every year through the celebration of the feast? It's because what they're in contact with is the nations around them. Does that make sense? They had to be continually purified to be able to maintain their exposure to the presence of Yahweh.
So.
Yes.
Then to go back to your original statement, it's not that those other 4 feasts were then disregarded, but he only put those 3 feasts in the law at this point just to reiterate purification. It's not that those other ones were forgotten or not to be done anymore.
Let me say it this way. There is some reason why there used to be 7 and now there's 3.
But wait, I'm not asking the reason. I am posing a possible explanation. But what I am actually asking is, did those 4 go away, or are they just listed here? Like, do you remember how we were talking about how Moses did things out of order for a particular reason?
Totally.
So, are you saying that the 4 still need to be also done as it was stated in the other part of Torah? However, he's just
Males don't have to go to Jerusalem for the other 4. These are the 3 that all the men in all of Israel have to go to Jerusalem for every year. 3 times a year, every man in Israel had to go to Jerusalem. And it was for these 3 feasts. The other 4 feasts, those are still good things to do. Those are still in remembrance of things that Yahweh has done and things that they're looking forward to, right? The Feast of, Day of Atonement, that was still done every year. What are the other ones we're missing? The Feast of First Fruits, that was still done every year, but it wasn't a thing that you had to go to Jerusalem to do. My point is, there were 7 before and now there's 3. What's Moses getting at? I can't think of anything else besides picking up on the pattern of 3 and 7.
Yeah.
Maybe that's too big of a leap for you, that's okay.
No.
I didn't mean for you specifically,
No,
I
I
meant
know.
just generally. If I'm making a leap that you don't want to make with me, I'm okay with that.
But I still don't understand. Should I wait until after class? I don't understand what you're saying. Are you saying they're, at this point in time, they're not doing the other 4? Because you said there were 7 and now there's 3. Are you saying there's only 3?
Well, there's only 3 that all the males in Israel have to go to the place that God places him.
Okay, the other
Well, they
one's
still
being
celebrate
done.
the other one.
Sure, yeah, but they don't have to go to Jerusalem to do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
And they
okay.
didn't,
Just wanted to
So
make sure.
why was my point? Why is that was my point.
and they didn't have to originally.
Originally, they all lived around the tabernacle. No one would have to go anywhere.
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah, because the nation of Israel hadn't spread out.
Oh. So he's paring it down because everybody's gonna have to go for it.
Exactly. So now you have 3 that you go to where God is, where before everyone was already where God is. But we're about to spread out as a nation. So, yeah. Good point. I guess that context is helpful.
Yeah, sometimes
No, you're good. It's okay. Sometimes I'm slow too. So justice. I love this. Put judges, officers in all your towns. When they can't judge something, they'll go to the Levites to make a judgment. They're not allowed to pervert justice. They can't show partiality. They can't accept a bribe. How would partiality pervert justice? If a judge is good buddies with one person who's coming to him and not good buddies with another person who's coming to him, don't you think he would kind of judge in favor of his buddy?
Happens every day.
Every day. So how about a bribe? How does a bribe pervert justice?
Happens every day.
Oh man, this is a big one in Uganda. Bribing culture is huge in many third world countries, but Uganda is a big one.
Bigger than this country? I mean, we have.
We like to keep
corporations
it,
that
it's
drive
just as big of a deal here, but we like to keep it under the surface and not talk about it. Exactly. In Uganda, it's out in the open. If you need something done at a government office, you bring money to pay the person to do it for you, and instead of just putting you in a file. Anywhere that, totally. A lot of places like that too. So how does a bribe pervert justice? If I have money to pay the bribe, then I get the thing done. But what about people who don't have money to pay the bribe? They get put in the file. And so what I'm doing, and this was big in Uganda, especially because I'm white, and white people, the assumption is that you just peel money off your skin. I have the power to do injustice because of the amount of money that I possess. The rich person gets what they need, and the poor person has no opportunity to do it. And so what's being done here in Israel subverts that whole system and gives everyone an opportunity to get what they need.
So is this where they actually established the judges?
You mean the judges from Judges?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say so. That doesn't come until after Joshua. These are judges, but I think they're different judges than what those judges did. Specifically in Judges, they're going to be described as like saviors. God's going to raise up a judge to save the people from this attack of some foreign power. Yeah.
He's like,
I read that, but didn't get it.
Most disappointed when he was listening to everybody's problems.
More like that. Yeah. More like that. Because think about it, you're about to spread out the nation, right? People can't just go to Jerusalem when they have a beef with their neighbor. So you have to have judges in every city. Yeah.
Well, and we think of judges differently because our government is set up where it's a thing that's a separate rule.
Mhm.
So these guys, it's a broader governing and making a decision, because this is like a smaller government, tribal, you're oriented around the family most of the time. So it's kind of like elders who do all this stuff, and we don't do that.
So there is at some point they explained who the judges are in Judges, right? I read this, but I didn't get it.
But they did like the whole country. It's like one guy doing the whole country. That's not good.
Cool. We got 30 more minutes and 3 more chapters. Perfect. So I like what's going on here at the end of chapter 16 and beginning of chapter 17, because if you look at where the ESV puts the title, it's like they're trying to tell them that they got the chapter written in the wrong place. And I agree with them. It happens a few times in Deuteronomy, and I'm like, why did we just not put it where it should have gone? Forbidden forms of worship. We're going to be dealing with idols. I think we talked about this maybe last week or 2 weeks ago. What was the thing that determined whether a king, so think about kings, this person began reigning in Israel, he did what was good in the sight of the Lord, like David his father had done, or he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, like Rehoboam his father had done. What was the thing that is always brought up next after that statement? Did I mention this? The thing that, like, it's about 90% of the time, it's not a hard and fast rule, but all throughout Kings, it's like, Joash began ruling in Judah. He was however many years old when he began to reign. He ruled for this many years. He was good in the sight of the Lord. And the next thing that comes is either he broke down the Asherah and the high places and took down the idols, but he didn't tear down the Asherah, the high places, and the idols of all the other nations. And sometimes you have a king who is wicked, and it's explicit that they're wicked because they didn't tear down the idols. Sometimes you have a king who's good. In Judah, Israel, and all of their 17 rulers, there's 26 in Judah and 17 or 18 in Israel, something like that. However many rulers were in Israel, there wasn't one good one. And then Judah has some good ones and some bad ones. It always seems to come back to, or at least always mentioned, what did they do with the high places, the Asherah, the idols of all the other nations. So, here's where we're getting that from. You shall not plant any tree as an Asherah beside the altar of Yahweh, your Elohim, that you shall make. And you shall not set up a pillar, which Yahweh, your Elohim, hates. You shall not sacrifice to Yahweh your Elohim an ox or a sheep in which is a blemish or a defect, for that is an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. If there is found among you within any of your towns that Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, a man or woman who does what is evil in the sight of Yahweh your Elohim in transgressing his covenant and has gone and served other gods. Okay, so what is the number one way that we can transgress the covenant? Is to serve other gods, right? And worship them. Because obviously lying would be transgressing the covenant, but that doesn't seem to be what we're worried about. The number one way to transgress the covenant is to serve other gods and worship them, or to serve the sun, or the moon, or any of the host of heaven, which I have forbidden, and it is told you and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently. And in other words, don't punish them based on the evidence of one witness. That's something we'll talk about at the end tonight. You shall inquire diligently, and if it is true and certain that such an abomination has been done in Israel, then you shall bring out to your gates that man or woman who has done this evil thing, and you shall stone that man or woman to death with stone. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. The person shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. The hand of the witnesses shall be first against him to put him to death. Kind of reminds me of, what is it, John 8? The woman caught in adultery, let him who is innocent cast the first stone. Who had to cast the first stone when you're stoning someone?
The one who's bringing up the charges.
The one who's bringing up the charges. Yeah, exactly. So the hand of the witnesses shall be first, and you purge the evil from your midst. And it very much kind of just mirrors where we started tonight in chapter 13 with dealing with worshiping the gods of the other nations. Okay, legal decisions by priests and judges is what is coming up next. And this basically says that those judges who we talked about in the last chapter, if any case, this is verse 8, if any case is too difficult for you, then you arise and go to the place that Yahweh your Elohim will choose. This Deuteronomy 12 is becoming more and more important as this phrase gets repeated more and more frequently. The centrality of worship becomes a really big issue in Israel, and it's not surprising that it's one of the first things that is broken when the nation divides in, like, what is it, 930 BC, something like that, when Israel and Judah split. So if any of the cases are too hard for the judges, they can come to the Levites in, Shiloh at first and then Jerusalem later. And you do everything that the Levites tell you to do. You shall not turn aside from the verdict that they give. The man who acts presumptuously by not obeying the priest who stands to minister there before Yahweh your Elohim or the judge, that man shall die. So you shall purge the evil from Israel, and all the people shall hear and fear and not act presumptuously again. That works, right? Okay, laws concerning Israel's kings. This one's pretty neat. Today I had to pull out a paper Bible. It's the first time in a while I've done that. I've used logos a lot, but I couldn't remember the reference, so I had to pull out my paper Bible and look through all my notes. When you come into the land that Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom Yahweh your Elohim will choose. Do you remember the story in, I think it's Samuel? Yeah, the story when the people were like, we want a king, and Samuel's like, don't ask for a king like the other nations. You don't want to be like the other nations. You want God to be your king. And God comes back to him and says, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Like, I think he forgot to read Deuteronomy 17 that morning because God already said it was okay. So you may indeed set a king over you. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You shall not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. Since Yahweh has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And of course, you think of Solomon. So, 1 Kings chapter 10. Not 120. There we go. He does all three of them. So 1 Kings 10:21. 10:21. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. Silver was not considered anything in the days of Solomon. Does he sound super rich? Silver is nothing. Okay, so acquiring lots of gold, lots of silver, and then every 3 years the ships of Tarshish would show up with gold and silver and ivory and apes and peacocks. I guess there were apes in Israel at one point, which is pretty neat. So 28, Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Q, and the king's traders received them from Q at a price. So Solomon is acquiring many horses and getting them from Egypt. Exactly what Deuteronomy 17 said don't do. Right? This is the guy with the wisdom. Okay, so now the third thing, women. 11:1. King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh. That seems like a problem, right? Because he's the king of Egypt. Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, who also, at least Hittites, I can't remember if Ammonites are also included on the list. The Hittites were one of the 7 people who was supposed to be eradicated during the conquest of Canaan. So, that even points to a past inability of Israel to be obedient to God. One second, I'm making a point. From the nations concerning which Yahweh had said to the people of Israel, don't enter into marriage with them. Okay, so, down in verse 6. So Solomon, was he a good king or a bad king?
Medium.
He did bad things. All the kings did bad things.
Okay.
David did bad things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so was David a good king or a bad?
He was a good king, he did bad things.
So as you read through Kings and Chronicles too, but more so Kings, all of the kings kind of get this standard, and it's a black and white. We want an in-between, because everyone's human, right? But the standard is black and white. It says, so Solomon did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and did not wholly follow Yahweh, as David his father had done. What did I say was the next thing that follows that phrase?
Whether or not they broke them.
Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrificed to their Elohim. So was Solomon a good king or a bad king?
Not at the end, he wasn't good.
Now, of course, we want there to be a middle ground. To some extent, of course, Solomon did some good things, right? But at the end of the day, the scale by which the kings are judged says that he was an evil king who built altars to foreign Elohim. He took all the 3 things, 4 things. Don't acquire horses, don't return to Egypt, don't acquire wives, don't acquire excessive money. The dude he was the richest guy who ever lived. He had 1,000 wives, 700 wives, and 300 concubines. Yeah.
But you I feel like you can't really call him a bad king because he ended up not sacrificing on a high place anymore and taking the sacrifices and putting and sacrificing where he was supposed to sacrifice to begin with. And the same thing is like you asked about David, like the same thing. I mean, how can you say a blanket statement? Like, how can we do that? Like, can we do that? Because I feel like...
Well, let me just show you another example of how this same pattern shows up in Kings. We're studying Deuteronomy tonight, but we're just taking a detour here. Jehoshaphat, the son of Asa, began to reign in Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shili. He walked in the way of Asa his father. He did not turn aside from it, doing what was right in the sight of the Lord. Was he a good king or a bad king? He was good. Yet, the high places were not taken away, and the people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. So he wasn't a great king, but he's a good king. And let me just... Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, began to reign in Israel and Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 2 years over Israel. Was he a good king or a bad king? He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. See, this is a pattern. It's a linguistic pattern that shows up anytime you have a new king in Israel or Judah. It tells us who they were, how old they were when they started reigning, how long they reigned, who their parents were, whether they were good or bad, and what they did about idols. The common pattern. It shows up about 90% of the time with the kings. Yeah. Every once in a while, one will break the pattern, but that's like a special thing.
So did Solomon redeem himself later?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm
Well,
not
he
really-
stopped making sacrifices on the high plate, like he turned aside from that and started, making sacrifices. Where did he make it? Where did he make sacrifices instead of the high plate? Solomon.
Oh, you mean in 1 Kings 3, he started bringing them to Jerusalem when he
To
got wisdom.
Jerusalem, right.
Yeah.
So, like, I feel like when somebody, like, so she asked to be between himself, and you're like hesitating, but
Yeah, I'm hesitating. Because we just read that he was evil. He did evil in the sight of the Lord.
It's kind of like, it depends on the snapshot of when you're looking at it, time-wise. It looks way better earlier on.
Well, the same is true for David. If you snapshot David and the Bathsheba incident, he looked pretty bad.
right. So are you saying like they're all kings were bad because they did what, like they were all bad?
No, there were some good ones in there. Like Jehoshaphat said he did right in the sight of the
Yeah,
Lord.
but he never took down the idols that his people sacrificed.
Yeah, that's true. But he did what was right in the sight of the Lord.
No, he didn't. He didn't take down the
But you can't say no, he didn't, because we just read that he did.
I know. Then we're misreading. That's
Well,
why.
I think that it's a consistent pattern that's only rarely broken. That we find out who the king was, who his parents were, how old he was when he became king, how long he reigns, was he good or bad, what did he do with idols.
Yeah.
Sometimes, good or bad, appears to be dependent upon the idols. Like, for example, Manasseh, who sacrifices his son to Molech in the valley of the son
Yeah.
where we get Gehenna. He seems to be bad because of what he did with the idols. And other times you see a king who's judged good or bad despite what he did with the idols. But it almost always seems to be included. Is that what did they do about idols in Israel?
Right. But I'm just talking about the question that you asked, was it good or was it bad? I don't think you came to a consensus, or you could say that they're only good or bad depending on what it says there. Like you're gonna agree that they did these bad things, but they're labeled good or bad depending on what.
So I have this big chart that I made on a piece of poster board.
That's awesome.
And I have like a line here with Saul and David and Solomon, and then I have the kingdom dividing, and then going forward on the timeline to 722 for the northern kingdom, and then 586 for the southern kingdom. And I have a green marker and I have a red marker. And if it says that they were evil in the sight of the Lord, I highlighted their name with a red marker. And if it says that they were good or did right in the sight of the Lord, I highlighted their name with a green marker. And like what? It seems pretty black and white.
No, it doesn't.
Red, green.
Or red and green. Anyway, we're talking about Deuteronomy. We're about to lose our time.
Yeah, but
But are you saying, so, when you ask that question, are they good or bad, you're not, or are you also asking, like, are they in heaven?
So that's what we want to
To
be
me, those
asked,
are two
right?
different questions.
I think they're two different questions. As 21st century Western believers, that's what we want that question to be asking, because we want to know, did they go to heaven or did they go to hell? I don't think that's what the text is trying to tell us.
So in some ways, wow, they're good king, bad king, that's one question.
Yeah.
Are we gonna see them in heaven as another?
At the end of the day, a bad king could still have faith in the Messiah, right?
David was a good king, but a good king.
Yeah. Saul was a bad king, so that's what he did.
yeah, and Jehoshaphat,
He should have taken down the idols.
not only that, the law said he should have killed all of them people.
Totally.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And then later on, because the law gets lost, and then who is it? Is it Joash? Who's the king who finds the law in the temple? Josiah. Finds the law, reads the law, everyone mourns about how they haven't kept the law, and then they have like this time where everyone is kind of good for a little while, and then like he dies, and the next king comes along, and all the idols go right back.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Kings is complicated. I bring it up tonight because, remember, our normal question when we want to do expositional study of Scripture is, where have I seen this before? But we're studying the Torah, I'm trying to do it well, but it also means that because we're studying the beginning, I have to sort of point out stuff that we haven't studied yet, so that you know when you get there to ask, where have I seen this before? The normal question is not, where will I see this again? But as you read through the Bible, if you're not currently doing the whole thing, you have to read back, not forward, but we're just in a position where we have to read forward. So that's why I wanted to go to Kings. Back to Deuteronomy? Anyone object? All right, back to Deuteronomy.
Back to the Torah.
Back to the Torah, back to the law. Okay, so provision for priests and Levites. Remember, these guys, they don't get a portion with Israel. They don't get a piece of land. So where do they get their food? Verse 1 says, they shall eat Yahweh's food offerings as their inheritance. They shall have no inheritance among their brothers. Yahweh is their inheritance, as he promised them. And this shall be the priesthood for the people. From those offering a sacrifice, whether an ox or a sheep, they shall give the priest the shoulder and the 2 cheeks. Not really what I want to eat. And the stomach. So try it, right? The first fruits of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the first fleece of your sheep you shall give him. For Yahweh your Elohim has chosen him out of all the tribes to stand and minister in the name of Yahweh, him and his sons, for all time. And if a Levite comes from any of the towns of Israel where he lives, to the place that Yahweh will choose, and ministers in the name of Yahweh his Elohim, like all his fellow Levites to stand and minister, then he may have equal portions to eat, besides what he receives from the sale of his patrimony. Which I think, if I just go over here and hold my mouse over this number 4, it says the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain, which I'm just like, come on, man. So, I mean, it kind of, I think that's about the best translation we can do here, because mimachar is sale. The sale of his patrimony comes from the word
avot. It's just like fathers. It's
fathers,
not very specific.
It's like the selling, besides what he gets from selling his fathers. What do you mean?
His inheritance.
His inheritance. But he doesn't have an inheritance because he's Levite.
Right.
Right, so we do. It's a hard thing to translate. The ESV is just saying, like, we had a really hard time with this one. So there's your provision for the Levites. They get all their food from their service in the tabernacle. Yahweh is their inheritance. They don't get land. We've been over that before. So abominable practices is the next section of this chapter. And I'm just going to jump down here to verses 10 through 12. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering. That works out, right? Anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens or a sorcerer or charmer or medium or necromancer or one who inquires of the dead. Remember when Saul was about to go into battle and he was like, I need to talk to Samuel, so I'm going to go to this witch even though I killed all the other witches.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so there's that. So that doesn't work out either. For whoever does these things is an abomination to Yahweh. And because of these abominations, Yahweh, your Elohim, is driving them out before you. Who's the them in that sentence?
People that are practicing that.
The other nations. Because if we go up to verse 9, the practices of those nations who are already in the land. So what he's saying is, the reason that these other nations are being kicked out, because of these abominations, Yahweh, your Elohim, is driving out these other nations. So if you participate in the same thing that the other nations are doing, because remember, they're being held to the same standard of the law, right? If you do these same things, presumably what's going to happen to you? You are also going to be driven out. It makes total sense. This is one of those times where I'm like, Deuteronomy is so easy to interpret, because it's like, I'm going to kick them out because they do this, and if you do it, I'm also going to kick you out too. So, this is a good one. Yahweh, your Elohim, will raise up for you a prophet like me. Who's speaking? Moses. A prophet like Moses. From among you, from your brothers. And it is to him you shall listen. Just as you desired of Yahweh. So up to this point in the text, what have we been looking for? The seed, the head crusher. We haven't found him. And now we're going to add to the list. Now we're also looking for a prophet like Moses. So we need a seed, we need a head crusher, and we need a prophet like Moses. What is the defining characteristic of a prophet like Moses? just as you desired of Yahweh your Elohim at Horeb, which is another word for Sinai, on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear again the voice of Yahweh my Elohim, or see this great fire anymore, lest I die. And Yahweh said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you among your brothers, and put my words in his mouth. So they don't want to hear God speak. And God says, I'm not going to let them hear me speak, or else they're going to die. So what did Moses do?
He was intercession.
Interceding,
Yeah.
mediating. So what is the primary characteristic of the prophet like Moses?
To mediate
To
between
mediate.
us and God.
Between us and God.
That's true.
Right, spoiler alert. We're looking for the head crusher, the seed of the woman, and the prophet like Moses. Maybe it'll be Joshua, right? Because he's the one who's going to come up after Moses, and we're just reading the Bible from front to back. Maybe Joshua will come along, and he'll be the seed of the woman, and the head crusher, and the prophet like Moses. Boy, I should hope so. It would make the Bible a lot shorter.
So John 1, 20 and 21, they first ask John the Baptist, are you the Messiah? Then they say, well, are you Elijah? Are you the prophet? So they seem to have a list of several different people. And they didn't
Well, because
even
Malachi
know.
prophesies that Elijah's going to return
Yeah.
before Messiah, so they would naturally they would ask about, are you Elijah?
Yeah, so they didn't even know that the prophet like Moses and the Messiah was necessarily supposed to be the same person.
Interesting. Okay, so
Because they,
here's-
as was like the third question, the prophet was the third question after
right
Messiah.
after Messiah. That's a great point. So here's something weird. Jesus is not the only person who seems to look like a prophet like Moses. Joshua looks like a prophet like Moses. David looks like a prophet like Moses. Have you ever thought how weird it is that Stephen's face is shining before he's stoned? Like Moses would go up on the mountain and come down and have to cover his face because it was shining and all the people were freaked out. Stephen, even after Jesus, was a prophet like Moses. And so it's like this almost like repeating thing. Now Jesus obviously is the ultimate fulfillment of the prophet like Moses, but it is this kind of interesting repeating thing.
Elijah didn't come back?
That's a big question that I don't have time for, but it has to do with John the Baptist.
Yes, like he will come in the spirit of Elijah.
In the spirit of
But
Elijah.
he also, but then in another place it says he was not Elijah. So like, I studied that, I'm trying to find the answer, and I could not find the answer. Is there an answer?
Yes, but it's not as good as we might like. He comes in the spirit of Elijah. Elijah's hairy, right?
Yeah.
So
John,
so's John, right? Elijah's a man of the wilderness. So's John. Okay, but let's take it a step beyond just let's connect these two. The hairiness of Elijah, I think, potentially speaks to the Nazarite vow. Because what did you do with the Nazarite vow? You don't cut your hair, right? What was the purpose of the Nazarite vow? You have Samuel, who was a Nazarite, and he anointed David. John the Baptist is a Nazarite, and he anoints Jesus. So I think what you have with this whole person like Elijah, and Elijah, although he wasn't one of the writing prophets, was the one who initiated the ministry of the prophets during the time of Kings. In Israel, he was like the first, started off the time of these prophets, right? In the same way that John the Baptist initiates or prepares a way or makes straight the path for the ministry of Jesus.
right, so he doesn't really, like, when they prophesied that Elijah would come back, yeah.
They were referring to John,
I believe so.
even though it wasn't.
Even though it wasn't Elijah, right?
And so when so John the Baptist comes in the spirit of Elijah. Elijah, remember, he called down fire and killed the whole army. And when when James and John said to Jesus, "Do you want us to call down fire?" What does he say? He doesn't say no. He says, "You don't know of which spirit you are from." Meaning, John the Baptist is from the spirit of Elijah, the one who calls down fire. But you now, my disciples, who are coming after me, you need to be of the Holy Spirit.
Isn't Elijah the one that never really died, he went away in the
Yeah.
fiery chariot?
Yeah, he was one of the two. The other one, he walked with God and was not forgotten.
They never did find, nobody witnessed that.
Yeah, no, not with Enoch. There's no statements of witnesses.
There's a good old song, Enoch walked with God and he was taken.
Yeah.
Transported in the twinkling of an eye.
But
He
with
didn't need a
Elijah-
spaceship, he didn't even have to wait to die.
But with Elijah, Elisha witnessed.
He's there, he
Yeah.
saw the fiery
Gives the
chariot.
account of it, yeah. Oh, man, we ran out of time.
Well, sorry.
That's okay. Oh, new cities of refuge, review of cities of refuge. In chapter 19, you have cities of refuge. If you kill someone, where do you go? You go to a city of refuge. How many are there? There's 3, unless God gives you more space, in which case there's going to be more than 3. There's actually going to be 6, because you have 3 on the west side of the Jordan and 3 on the east side of the Jordan. The cities of refuge are Levite towns that the Levites are given in the territories, and if you accidentally kill someone, you can go there. And if you kill someone not by accident, you can also go there, because what happens in a city of refuge is a fair trial. And if it's found that the killing of a person was intentional, you are not going to be given refuge in the city of refuge. You're going to be given over to the Goel, the kinsman redeemer, right? And if it's found that you killed someone by accident, you're going to be given refuge in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest, because someone's blood has to pay for the blood that was spilled, and it's all the refuge is a picture of Jesus, the high priest is a picture of Jesus, the fair trial, the justice is a picture of Jesus, it's all a picture of Jesus.
So when the high priest dies,
Then you can go
that's
free.
the blood that was spilled for the person that was in the city of refuge?
For the person that this person who was in the city of refuge killed. Because there has to be blood for blood.
Right. So you're saying that not Jesus, but before that, you have a high priest in that city, and when he dies, his death is what washes away the sin of the person that killed him.
Yes, but it's not just the high priest in that city, there's only one high priest in Israel.
Oh, okay.
So this would be the high priest when he dies. Because if you killed that person, your blood needs to be spilled. If it was an accident, there still has to be blood for blood. You have to stay in that city of refuge until the death of the high priest, and after that time you're free.
So everybody in all the cities can read.
Okay. All the unintentional killers.
Yes.
Property boundaries, we talked about your security of inheritance. Right? No one can take your inheritance from you, your neighbor can't move your boundary. And then finally, laws concerning witnesses. This is so good. Okay, we're going to pick up next week in 1915, because I don't want to skip it. And we'll pick it up next week. Cool. Sweet. Love it. Anything real quick? Any quick thoughts? Anything need to be said? Sweet.
How far do we read next week?
I will figure that out.
Oh,
We'll do 20 through 26. We only have 3 more weeks after tonight. So next week we're going to do 20 through 26. The week after we're going to do 27 through 34. That's going to finish Deuteronomy. And then our last week is going to be Hebrews. Because I think that's how I think we have to conclude the Torah. I think we don't do justice to the Torah if we don't finish it in Hebrews. So we're going to have 2 more weeks in Deuteronomy and then 1 week in Hebrews, and that will conclude our Torah class. So for next week, read 20 through 26, and I'll also put that in the email I send out tomorrow. Sound good? Dave, wait for it, Sure. Thank you.